if that is the case, if the student says, this is the only professor that I really know very well at all, then you got bigger problems.
What's going on, Mapped?
Hello.
Beta. Our Mapped
Hello,
Beta
hello,
pre-order
hello,
launch.
hello.
We got Dr. Scott Wright. How are you?
Doing well. It's only 93 today in Austin, Texas.
Only 93. That's looking at the bright side of things. It's always the perspective. It could be 115 like Phoenix is usually is at this time.
But it's 70% humidity here, so
yes, that is true.
It's biting.
Right? And Rachel Grubbs, how are you today?
Hey, Rachel.
I'm well. I'm coughing again some, but we've got the mute button, so
got a mute button.
It'll be okay.
Well, I'm excited to have another amazing episode of Ask the Dean, which is now a podcast. The first episode is out in iTunes, Google Podcasts, or iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. So if you're watching this on YouTube later on after this is live, you can go subscribe to the podcast as well. Yeah. Or for you watching live here in the Mapped Beta pre-order group, our launch group, almost 800 people have signed up for Mapped. We're excited. But before we jump in, and I know I saw one question pop up. Since we recorded Ask the Dean last, we now have 4 people using Mapped. 4 real students in Mapped using. Scott, you came into this a little bit later than Rachel and I, since Rachel and I co-founded this together. When we first pitched this idea to Map to you and what our brainchild was and what we wanted it to do, and then you saw someone actually doing what kind of our thoughts and ideas were, what was that like for you?
It was awesome, actually, because it's incredible to see an idea, the genesis of an idea, explode into reality.
Yeah.
And to see those students putting in courses and putting in their MCAT scores and typing in activities that they've been participating in, and getting their feedback on what it was like to do all that, and it was really incredible. I mean, it was incredible for me. I'm sure for you guys who have been really involved in it at a much longer period of time and a much greater level. It was just overwhelming, but I was super pleased with how everything was going, and I think we got some good feedback from those students that were using it. But it was a really great experience to watch all that happening.
Now, you have a unique perspective from director of admissions, from running the pre-health office at UT Dallas, to being former executive director of TMD SAS. You have way too many former titles.
Well,
for students who are watching this, listening to this, who are working with their pre-health advisor, with your experience, how much do you think this potentially would help the communication with their advisor in the future?
Oh, I think it's a game changer, because I think that, when I was sitting in the role of an advisor and a student would walk into my office, it would have been so beneficial to me to be able to log into a system like Mapped and to be able to see what the student has input into that. Not only their courses, but their activities, what they've been doing, and what they're learning out of what they've been doing, what their trend line looks like in terms of GPA, what those practice test scores are looking like, what the real test scores are looking like in terms of MCAT. I mean, being able to do all that and see all that with a student would have been really a massive game changer in terms of what I was going to be able to do to help them in the process. Otherwise, because, if I'm able to just log in and look at all that in a snapshot, then it makes a huge difference, because then we're not spending a lot of time going over all that stuff in an advising session. We're able to really talk about the meaty information and what's happening and where is this going, and how are you how do you feel like things are going with you, et cetera, with a student. And so I think it's going to be a game changer in terms of on the student's perspective and also from an advisor perspective. I'm very pleased with it.
I think you just coined a new kind of subtitle, a new slogan for us. Mapped, get to the meat.
Yeah, get to the meat. That's right. I mean,
like
it really does allow the student and the advisor to get to the real heart of the issues that they need to discuss in a session, because you're looking at a session which typically lasts 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, where you really need to get to the heart of things. And that's important. So I'm really excited about what this can do in the relationship between an advisor and a student. In
Rachel,
addition to what it can do with the student on their own.
Yeah. Rachel, what did you think? Seeing that happen?
Well, first I'm going to say, get to the beans.
No, I saw that comment. I'm going to ignore it. There's fake meat. You can have fake meat for the vegetarians out there.
Yes, fake meat. It's not called fake meat. It's called amazing meat, or so. I don't know. They have some word for it.
But just regular old beans are better. Okay, vegetarianism aside, I have been. It's weird, right? Because it's our own product, right? So you're proud and happy, and then you're beating yourself up because it's good. And I'm so excited and just literally watching like our dream become a reality. And yet there's so much more we want to do. So especially when we started having beta testers, and we three and our folks on the tech team know what we want to have happen in the next couple weeks before it actually launches, and what we want to have happen in the next couple months, and what we even dream about what might happen in the next future years. So you put it out there, and it's this baby that you build, and then you're like, it is brand new. It's just learning to walk.
It's gonna fall down a few times.
So yeah, I mean, I'm really proud and really happy, and I also want to just keep banging away and continue to get slowly, to be careful to make sure we don't overload, but keep getting users in the system. And sorry about calling you guys users. That's just a tech term. I mean, like real live human beings. Because Ryan and Scott and I can get in there and play and do fake entries, but you guys are going to catch things we don't catch. So we want to start kind of this steady trickle of getting more real premeds into the system, so that we can continue to get your feedback and improve it. And it's not like when we launch, the feedback stops and the improvement stops. It's ongoing. It's just that, these next 4 weeks are really, well, even just 3 or 4 weeks are really critical for getting as much improvement as possible before we start to open it up to hundreds of people. We're at 4 today. We're hoping to be at 800 before school goes back for most semester schools. Like, there's some more improvements we can make. So excited, but also wanting to keep working.
Yep. Awesome.
Of course.
All right. Enough about us. I just wanted to get your reaction, and I'm so excited. What we got question wise? Let's kick it off. Have some fun.
Right.
Dr. Gray, being that you work with Blueprint, I don't know if I'd worry. I'll preface that later. I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are regarding prep courses. Between 3 options: do-it-yourself compiling resources from content books, UWorld, Double MC versus Kaplan course versus Blueprint prep course. Being that I'm a non-traditional student, took some of my prereqs like Gen Chem a few years ago. What would you recommend? So let me just put my little asterisks, make sure I'm meeting the letter of the law. Just my relationship with Next Step is I'm an affiliate of them. So I promote them and promote their practice tests because you guys tell me that they're the best practice tests out there. So I'll go with that until you guys tell me there's another company out there that has better practice tests. So that's the majority of my relationship to to prep course or not to prep course? Really, at the end of the day, that's the biggest question. The far, far, far majority of students, I think 60% or so, Rachel, this is more your world. It's like 60% don't use any sort of third-party prep sort of products.
Yeah.
So you don't need them.
No, you don't. I mean, I've worked for prep companies for a lot of my career. Not everyone needs one. I mean, I think everyone needs AAMC exams.
Yep.
I think almost everyone is going to need at least one other third-party resource, because you really want to save the AAMC exams for full lengths, and you're going to need to do drilling or practice passages. So whether it's, a Q bank or a P bank or a set of books or, blueprint next steps practice exams, DIY is pretty common these days. And what I would say is that I always recommended, if you have not just the discipline, because I think I'm generalizing here, most pre-meds have a lot of discipline, but also the ability to stay positive and the ability to self-analyze. Because where MCAT prep can be tricky is you really do have to think about your study skills and your exam taking skills very differently than the way college asks you to do those things. Mm-hmm. So you have to be self-aware enough to really review your work and never go, oh, that was just a lazy mistake, I'll get it next time, but really analyze it. And when you get it right, even figure out, why did I get it right? And really think about your critical reasoning and your inquiry skills. And I think it's very tempting for DIYers to turn it into a knowledge exam. And the AAMC themselves say about 60% of the test is critical thinking of some form. So if you are highly disciplined and you think you're pretty self-aware, DIY is a great way to go. Mm-hmm. The course will offer you structure, and either Kaplan or Blueprint are going to give you a ton of analytics. And that's where it can be really helpful, is you can pore over your lessons learned journal, or you can just look at all the percentages that they spew out for you. So I think that's the pro con, is you're paying more for the course, but you're getting more hand-holding in terms of, what do I do beyond content? What do I do to make sure I'm working on my testing skills?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So really the follow-up question to that is, which prep course do I choose after that? And that's really, I mean, do you like a Pontiac versus a Saturn versus, and I just picked two cars that are no longer in business anymore for fun. I was trying to think of what other cars are not in business for a third one. I couldn't think that quickly, but yeah, it's, I mean, I love Blueprint's course. I've dug around in it. I love their new technology. I love their analytics on the back end. I love their videos and how engaging they are. So I really like them. But I don't think, at the end of the day, I don't think you can go wrong with anyone. It's just a matter of you putting in the effort.
Yeah. Agreed.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. For the personal statement, I know it is best to have an essay closer to the max character count. Should this apply to secondaries as well? So let's start off with the first potential statement here. It is best to have an essay closer to the max character count. Scott, would you agree with that?
No. No, I think so. That's making a broad brush statement, and I don't like the word best.
Yeah.
I think what is best is to say what you want to say.
Yep.
And now, I've seen some and honestly, when you get pretty close to the character count, they're not going to know. They don't have a character count little thing on the application. So when an admissions committee member looks at it, he goes, "Oh, well, they had 50 more characters to go. What the heck?"
They do that in the military, Scott.
Do they really?
Yeah, it's called have no white space. So when you have your performance reports, and it's EPR, OPR, depending on if you're enlisted or officer, it was the worst formatted like PDF that you had to fill out, and you would have one line per like accomplishment, and the goal was to have 0 white space. So like every single character counted for, and they had a list of official abbreviations that you could use. It was
Oh my
like
gosh.
that was probably the number one thing that I'm like, I'm not staying in the military forever. If this is if this is what you're worried about, me
Right.
having white space on this thing, and that's going to be some judge of whether or not someone else gets a promotion, like I'm out of here. Like there's many better things to do to solve world hunger and world peace, whatever. Anyway, so.
No, yeah, that's not at all how it works in the admissions game with admissions committee members. They're not going to know. I really think the key is saying what you want to say, and the meat of your message, and communicating that. Now, you don't want to have, you don't want to have 5,000 characters available to you and you use 1,000 of them.
Yeah.
But also, I don't think you want to, fixate on filling up every bit of that. I just don't think that's the way you want to go. Now, when you get to smaller essays on secondaries or even some of the activity descriptions, I do think it's more likely that you're going to run out of space and that you're going to have to be using some real notable abbreviations, or particularly in the activity descriptions and stuff like that, where you don't have a whole lot of room and you're really trying to pack a lot in there. Secondary essays, a lot of times they're 500 words or 300 words or whatever, and kind of depends on the school or in terms of how much room they give you. But I think the message here really is it's best to say what you want to say. They're not going to be looking at, you've got extra words you could have used, because they can tell. What is more likely is they're going to be able to tell if you're just trying to put stuff in there to take up space.
Yep.
If you're, if you get off message, or if you're really just kind of reiterating things or whatever, I don't think that's a good way to go at it at all. So I really don't agree with the premise of the question that it's best to do that. I think the best thing to do is to say what you want to say in a way that communicates who you are and what you're wanting to do and why to the reader. That's the best thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. So this is probably more relevant back when the ACOMAS, the DO application, was still 4,500 characters for their personal statement.
Yeah.
And so what I would see happen sometimes is students would write a 4,500 character essay and then use that for the AMCAS essay, which is 5,300 characters. And probably what I've talked about before is that it's very jarring usually to see that much shorter of an essay, because most essays go
pretty close to this.
Pretty close.
Yeah.
And usually what happens is that's just a flag to go, I wonder why it's so short. And most people are going to know, oh, this is probably their DO essay and they're just reusing it. So right off the bat, there's this like, are they lazy? Like they didn't want to rewrite it or add to it, or so that you're automatically like behind the 8 ball. And then it's like, okay, and now I'm going to look at it with a little bit more scrutiny to see if you're telling your story and all this other stuff. Right. So that's probably where that came from, or I've probably said it in the past to not do that. And that's why.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
But I don't like the idea that, particularly on secondaries and stuff, if you've got that mentality from the beginning on everything in the application, then I think that's the wrong mentality.
Correct. Yeah. My typical answer to that is it needs to be as long as it needs to be and no longer.
Yes, exactly. I remember one year at TMDSCS, this is totally different, but we had a personal statement. It was a kid from Texas who went to university outside of Texas, and he was applying to Texas medical schools. But you got a really big, huge, overt clue when his personal statement was one sentence, and it said, "Please do not accept me. I will not come." because he was applying to Texas schools simply because mom and dad wanted him to, but he didn't want to go there. He wanted to go somewhere else. And I just remember that as, okay, way to go. He was doing what mom and dad wanted, but anyway, that's a whole nother story.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
oh, man. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Don't be like that kid.
No, don't be that.
Have open and honest conversations with your parents about why you want to live your life and not live their life.
Yeah, exactly. I also saw a personal statement one year that was in all caps, the entire personal statement.
Stop yelling at me.
I know, right? I was like, what on earth was this person thinking?
Man, that's scary.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, well. For this upcoming year, I was supposed to be a junior. I've decided to defer my scholarship until next fall. I chose to do this because I didn't want to attend Zoom U, not to be able to participate in my campus activities, research, etc. I plan to take an EMT course in the fall and volunteer while also studying full-time for the MCAT. In the spring, I will work as a full-time EMT and shadow volunteer, etc. How do you think schools will view this?
Well, my first thought on that is if you don't want to attend Zoom U, you're assuming that EMT course this fall is going to not be Zoom.
Yep.
You're also assuming that you're going to be able to volunteer in the spring, which God help us all if we're still dealing with COVID in the spring next year. But who knows? So I think there's some implications to what you're saying, but I will say that I don't think that, and we've talked about this a lot relative to COVID, and I think it's that the traditional wisdom about what to do and how to go about doing things is kind of out the window right now. Yeah, it's just, I don't think you would run into any admissions committee member or any dean of admission that would have a problem with what you're saying you want to do. If you're talking about, hey, I really want to be involved in my campus, I want to be involved with in the classroom experience, and I really want to do that, so I'm going to take a year off, do some other things that I can do during that year, and hope that I can go back the next fall and really get back into it. I that makes total sense to me, and I think if that's what you want to do, it sounds like you've got a good understanding of why you want to do those things, and it's just going to be cognizant on you to represent those well and help the reader understand in terms of your application in the future why you did what you did. But on face value, I don't have a problem at all with what you're talking about.
Yep. It's just another divergent kind of path. And this whole, I love this word that I heard on a podcast a while ago called equifinality. Is you all end up in the same place as long as you're coming back and doing what you want to do. Right. As you said, Scott, it's like, why are you doing this? Right. It's not like I want to hang out in my mom's basement and smoke weed all day. I don't want to go to school anymore. Well, that's a different story. And really that's the goal of journaling, right? And we have that built into MAP to kind of to take notes and kind of put your thoughts down to go, why are you doing this? Because you will be asked on it on a lot of secondaries. Did you have any sort of disruptions or interruptions with your schooling and stuff like that?
Particularly, and I was editing some secondaries just today, and there's a lot of secondaries now that specifically are asking about COVID and have things, what is happening with you related to COVID, and has it put any barriers in your place and stuff. So this stuff is relevant, and the admissions committees really want to know, how is all this affecting you? And absolutely.
Hopefully they want to know, and they're not just checking a box by saying, I guess we should ask about COVID.
Yeah, right.
Hello, Dr. Gray. A couple of sessions ago, you mentioned something about underserved minority communities not having equal access to preventive medicine. I think it was in the context of a question that was asked if you thought the U.S. healthcare system would improve as a result of the pandemic. Could you elaborate on what you mean by unequal access to preventive medicine? Very interesting.
Wow.
So here's at the end of the day, obviously access to healthcare in this country is multifactorial. Number one, you have to have insurance, right? You have to have insurance that will be taken by the physician, by the provider, whoever it is that's seeing you. Number two, you have to have transportation to get to the clinic. Number three, you have to have the time to get to the clinic. So either you have time off from work, you have a babysitter, you have lots of other potential just variables that are put in the way. And so there's a lot of what we call access to healthcare that has nothing to do with healthcare, but these are these barriers to getting healthcare, where there's a lot of unequal access for poor, disadvantaged, minority, potentially patients. And so it's funny. A podcast episode I did this morning with an amazing dude. That's going to go out either this week or next week as we're recording this, was all about diversity and equity in healthcare. He's the diversity and equity chair or head at Hackensack Medical School in New Jersey, and we had an amazing conversation just around understanding those types of barriers and what's out there. So lots of variables. It's a huge conversation. I'm not smart enough to talk super in depth about all of it. I'm still learning. But there's just go research, and you can learn about it.
Yeah. And knowing, and let me just add, Ryan, too, that knowing that a good percentage, not a huge percentage, but there is a percentage of the American population who their healthcare is the ER.
Yep.
ER is not preventative care.
That's not preventative
ER is
care.
urgent care. That is, and so when we have a population of people who their only choice when they get the flu or when they get, when they, have a cut on their arm or whatever is to go to the big city ER and wait for 8 to 12 hours to be seen. This is a problem, and that is, but specifically addressing the issue of preventative care, that's a big issue.
Scott, I'm going to correct you live on air. Live on air. Preventive, not preventative.
I'm sorry.
Yes, that's okay. Almost everyone says preventative.
What did you say?
The cool kids know that there's no "t" in preventive.
Okay.
Now you know.
Apparently, I'm not as well educated as I thought. So, thanks for pointing that out live.
That's okay.
You'll edit that out of the podcast. You'll edit that out of the. Oh,
that's how we do. When I interview a preventive medicine specialist on the podcast, they go preventive medicine. I'm like, thank you for saying it properly. They're like, oh yeah, we can't stand when people say it the other way. It's one of those random words that preventative technically isn't wrong, but it's a made up word that was a lazy wrong word that we've used for so long that now it's a word.
Gotcha.
But the actual field is preventive medicine. So we use it.
Well, good to know. I learned something new today.
Little education for you.
I learned something new today.
So yeah, it just goes. I mean, you could follow the rabbit hole down, right? So let's say a patient does get to the doctor. Well, now the doctor says, "Oh, you need to exercise and eat healthy." Well, they're in a food desert and there's really no healthy food, and healthy food potentially costs more. And I know there's some data that, that's a myth or whatever, but, you need to work out, but how are you going to work out? I'm a single mom and I don't have time for this, whatever, right? There's just so many variables. And one thing, it was super, fortuitous that I had this conversation this morning with this doctor. He's not a medical doctor, but Tade is his first name. He's a education doctor, similar to you, I think. And he's at Hackensack. And I was listening to a podcast, actually, a book that I've talked to both of you about, Upstream. And in this book, Upstream, they talked about Hackensack being this like model medical school where they send first-year students out to the community into houses of patients to just hang out and see what's going on, and to really just understand and have empathy for how people live in the community and what their potential struggles are day in and out. And I thought that's an amazing thing to be able to do.
That is amazing. Just so you know,
Scott's Googling over there.
preventative is in the Merriam-Webster
I know, I told you it is.
dictionary.
But
And it may not,
the dictionary is a usage dictionary, not a is it right dictionary.
I understand that. I understand that. I just wanted to clarify just for my own purposes.
I told you it's technically not wrong.
Okay, I'm just saying. I'm just putting it out there.
All right. All right. So let's move on to a longer question that we won't post here, but I'll give a gist. It's a very common question that comes up. Scott, I don't know if you've been asked this by students. A student goes and asks their professor for a letter of recommendation, and the professor says, "Sure, I would love to sign one for you." Right. Not write one for you. I'd love to sign one for you.
Yep.
Will you write a draft and send it to me, and I'll tweak it and sign it for you? What are your thoughts there?
So, yeah, I've had this question before, and I've also had this in my experience at UT Dallas, where we had situations like this that came up, and we had to go to the professor and say, this is not an appropriate way of doing it.
You would do that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. We had one, there was one particular one, and he was a very nice older professor who really was just trying to get input from the student. But what I had to do was say, it's unethical more than anything. And I think if this is a thin line, I think, for the student, because the student, I'm sure, is thinking, oh, wow, that's cool. I can put really important stuff in there, and I can, help him kind of know more about me and whatever, and craft it in a way that's going to be a positive letter and a really good, strong letter. But I think that this really, and this is going to sound very, what would I use? Metaphysical, perhaps, or this philosophical, theoretical. But it really does, in my view at least, address a chief ethical quality of the student, that the student has to say, that's not appropriate. That's not appropriate for me to write my own letter and have the professor sign it, basically, is what that question is asking.
Yeah. And
I understand from the student's perspective that, well, he said, and so and he's a professor, and so, who am I to, question that?
What about from the other side of, that's the only letter writer that said yes, that's the only type of letter that I need, and he's the only, or she's the only person that I can ask, and I need it. Right, it's the students are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because the medical schools have these requirements, and they only have access to who they have access to.
I mean, I do understand that, but I think what the student, if that is the case, if the student says, this is the only professor that I really know very well at all, then you got bigger problems than just needing that one letter. So what that means is your entire college career, you've taken no opportunities to get to know anybody at all, to visit in office hours, to go and engage with a professor outside of the 300 people in your class. Yeah. You haven't done anything. And so you get to the end point and you say, well, what else am I supposed to do? Well, you should have done something 2 years ago, or a year ago, or 6 months ago, so that you can get in this position. So that, if I heard about that from a medical school, if I was on, as the dean of admissions, if I was to hear this student wrote the letter and the professor signed it, I would totally discount the letter completely. It would be off the table.
Yeah.
Wouldn't even look at it.
Yeah. What if the letters, does it matter, subject matter of the letter writer, right? If it's a non-science professor versus a science professor?
No, I think sometimes non-science professors write very rich letters that give you a lot more input from them about the character of the student, their work ethic, what their interests are. So I don't have a problem at all with
that's because the student's writing all those non-science
yeah, right,
letters.
of course.
Yeah, I don't know. It's such a.
We got a letter one year from a literature a professor in the English department. Most interesting letter I've ever seen, and this is totally off topic, but most interesting letter I'd ever seen. It was from a professor that taught classes on poetry.
Mm.
The letter was a poem.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm totally serious.
Oh.
It was a beautiful poem about the student.
Yeah, it was probably the student's like final project. Write your own letter, and that will be your final project too.
Iambic pentameter.
Oh, that's a little too much.
I thought it was brilliant. I loved it.
Yeah,
because I mean, as an admissions committee member, you're reading letter after letter after letter after letter, and then you encounter something like that. And it's like a little bit of a breath of fresh air suddenly. Oh, wow, this is interesting. Let me read this.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that doesn't give you the person watching this or listening to this, that doesn't give you free reign to get all creative and crazy on your personal statement.
No, not at all. Please. Yeah. That was not the purpose of that story.
Scott, it's Rachel. I wanted to chime in and ask, because I'm someone who's been asked to do a lot of letters of rec over the years.
Yeah.
When I'm tight for time, when I genuinely want to give the recommendation, but I'm tight on time, I tend to just ask for as much supporting documentation as possible.
Now that's a different thing. Yes.
Right. But so that's something the student might be able to offer, right?
Yes.
I don't feel like I can write it for you, but I'll give you my resume, my CV, a copy of my application,
my personal statement.
My mapped
yes,
access.
Absolutely. I think if a professor, and this is actually quite common, if a professor said, "Can I see a resume from you and a copy of your personal statement for the application?" Then that gives me as a letter writer, it gives me some context for what they're saying and what they're doing, and so I don't have a problem with that at all. Yeah.
Okay.
To me,
so
that's a
different
thing.
I mean, we talked about a lot of hypotheticals that weren't relevant to our particular student asking this question, which is good, right? It's good to get into those. But for the student who wanted to know about the professor saying, "Can you write it for me?" he or she can go back and say, "No, I'm not comfortable with that, but here are some ways I can support you," or can say, "No,
absolutely.
Thank you. I guess I won't take your letter."
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to tell on you.
Yeah.
Well,
don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's being supportive, giving supporting documentation. Absolutely is a grand way to help out the professor.
Yep. Cool. All right. Another question. Should I ask this follow-up one over here? I will. All right. So there's another student who we can't show the question. 4 years of subpar GPA, graduated with a 2.8 GPA in biology. How many credits of science courses should I take as a do-it-yourself post-bacc to prove my academic ability? Scott, this is an algorithm that we can create from apps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what we used to say at at Southwestern when I was there is we wanted to see at least 45 hours, all sciences. Obviously, the more you have, the more hours you have, the better the admissions committee is going to feel that GPA, that post-bacc GPA, is really who you are now, or really who you are in the sciences outside of now. And so the reason the number 45 was kind of our number was because if a student was a post-bacc student who was, for example, a second career student, who really had no experience in the sciences at all, if they were starting from ground zero with the sciences, and then they were going to have to, it was going to be about 45 hours to get them all done. To do all, to do stat, to do gen chem, ochem, biochem, and we required 4 semesters of biology, as opposed to 2 semesters in most of the other parts of the country. But I would say the more that you have, particularly of those upper level biological science classes, the more comfortable the admissions committee is going to be.
Yep.
And I think probably the better prepared you're going to be for the MCAT anyway.
Yeah, it's there was a saying when I went to my officer training for the Air Force that like the senior person in my squadron would say, he's like, anyone can hug a bear for 10 seconds, whatever it was, right? You just hug a bear, grab onto it, and just hug, and for your whole life, just hug, and you can get through it, right? Basically, just saying you can get through anything. Right? And basically, the 45 hours is proving that that's not what you're doing, right? That you're just sprinting, like 20 hours, I'm just going to give it all I got. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to do everything 20 hours. Okay, good, I'm done.
Right.
45 hours is, can you really do this and not just like a one-time sprint and you gave it all you got? And medical school is not going to be like that.
No, not at all. Yeah.
That's right. All right. Good one. What else? Any other questions we got, Rachel? Oh, yeah, we got one here. I'm taking classes outside my university at a community college because I need to retake some of my prereqs to take the 3,000 and 4,000 level classes. My university has said that these classes won't be calculated into my GPA. I'll put an asterisk on that. However, will these be calculated to my overall GPA when I apply to medical school? P.S. I'm retaking my prereqs because there were C-, and my university won't count them. And at community college, it's cheaper. All right. So this student asked the right question, right? The asterisk I was going to put on there was your university may not count the classes, which is why students are so confused about this whole process. They're like, look at my GPA is amazing, but your university got rid of all of your Fs that are still there that you need to put on
because you
your
retook
medical school
them.
application. Exactly. So regardless of what the university has, if they have grade replacement policies, forgiveness policies, whatever they have, except for another asterisk, like TMD SAS has the, is it Fresh Start or what's that called?
Yeah, Fresh Start. Mm-hmm.
Fresh Start. So that's a little bit different, but for the most part, every single class that you have taken, every single class basically that you've stepped foot in, regardless of getting a grade or not a grade or whatever, you basically have to put it on your application. So,
true.
So all of those grades will count.
Yeah, and I think that there's several levels to this question actually, and I think that my concern is that the student did not do well in the classes at the university, so they're going to community college to retake the classes. That's why the university is not going to count them, because you are retaking them at a different place, so they're not going to count them toward your degree or whatever. And so that is a concern to me, because let's say you made a C- in organic chemistry at the university. You go to community college and you take the class, you make an A. Well, what does that say to an admissions committee? I'm not banging against community colleges, but I think the reality is different than the perception. The perception of many admissions committee members is going to be, you couldn't hack it at the university, so you went to a easier place to make a better grade. And that, whether that's reality or not, is irrelevant if that's in the mind of the admissions committee members that are looking at your file. Now, you can kind of recover from that if, according to what you're saying you're going to do, you go and take 3,000, 4,000 level classes at the university, you do really well in them. then that's going to give credibility to the courses you took, and that you've kind of learned your lesson or whatever, and you're moving beyond that. So I think there's a lot going on here. I understand it's cheaper at community college. It's vastly cheaper often at the community college, and so I get that. But my concern is that if you do well at the community college in those prerequisite courses, and then you move on to the junior, senior level courses at your institution, at your university, if you struggle in those, then that's going to be a real problem.
Yeah. I think I would love to have a bigger conversation another time with you about how do we remove that perception, right? Because community colleges are cheaper. And we're sitting here on one hand saying we need more diversity. We need
absolutely
more representation from what our society looks like. But you can't go to community college, which is the one way that you can do it.
Yeah, and that's not the message at all that I'm trying to.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to send that message.
Yeah.
This specific question had some real specific issues in it.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Which are not the same as generalizing. I'm not trying to generalize community college. There's a lot of students that go to medical school that start off and do the first 2 years at community college and go on to university. And if in that situation, if your grades are consistent and you get to university and you're still doing great, or maybe you even do better, then that's wonderful. That's great. I think in this particular case, the concern is this retaking it
back and forth.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. It'd be interesting as an experiment for a class or just to actually test this kind of stuff. Well, number one, is there any data out there that shows that the community college courses are easier? Right.
Yeah.
So going off of data. But then number two, actually running an experiment and going, hey, I'm going to submit the data to the medical schools without any school names attached to the transcript.
Well, so I have a little interesting tidbit just about this very topic.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
My dissertation.
Darn it, I'm talking to the wrong person. I mean the right person.
Was not about community colleges because what we used was primary degree granting institution. But what I did in my dissertation was I looked at different levels of types of institutions. So I looked at, for example, private schools versus public schools, or I looked at, and then I looked at the selectivity of an institution in terms of their admission standards of a university. And what I looked at, the other thing I looked at was regional colleges versus research intensive colleges versus small liberal arts institutions. And what I was looking at was, does the student coming from these various types of institutions do differently when they're in medical school?
Yep.
Do they perform differently in the first 2 years of medical school specifically? Or do they do differently on what was the USMLE Step 1? And what I found was that there was a difference. And the difference was on regional state institutions. And it wasn't to say that regional state institutions are not good, but it was to say that typically regional state institutions are not schools that a lot of premeds necessarily go to. They go to a lot of different schools all over the place, but what they're looking at, what the statistical analysis that I did said. Now, of course, this was 20 years ago.
They had math back then.
I know what the. And so I say all that to say it would be interesting to see what that looked like, and some of it I didn't delve really any further into it. Some of it's a self-selection type of thing. And what we have to keep in mind is that a community college is an open enrollment institution.
Yep.
Anybody can walk into a community college and go to school.
Yep.
Whereas universities have admission standards that say you have to meet a certain level of a standard in high school or in previous transfer work to get in here and to walk in the class and to take classes.
Yep.
And so that dynamic does potentially change what the classroom environment is going to look like, as well as what the what the professor is going to do and what the curricular goals of the professor might be. It's not to say there aren't some great, amazingly stellar students that come out of community colleges and do great in university and do wonderful in medical school. But it is to say that there is a notable difference in terms of what who's walking into that classroom and what their previous preparation may or may not be.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I'm not putting any value statement on that. I'm just saying that it's kind of, that's the reality of our structure of things right now.
Yep.
Anyway,
burn it to the ground.
No. I love community colleges.
Yeah.
I think some of the most enthusiastic students I've dealt with are students who are at community colleges. I used to go yearly to a community college in the Dallas area to talk to their students who were doing the very pre-med kind of thing.
Yeah.
And often they had the best questions. They were the most motivated students.
Yep.
Because they were having to work and do stuff and still go to school, and they were having to do it all, and mom and dad weren't paying for it.
Yep. Exactly. So
I think a lot about that type of student, and I agree with you. It needs a lot more discussion.
Yeah. All right. There's one final question here. I see, Rachel, you want to throw that one up? The letter of rec one? Yeah. How many letters of rec should I plan on getting? I read somewhere that some universities may not read anything more than what they require, usually 3. So this is one of those, it depends. It depends on the school. Every school has different requirements, whether they want to science, one non-science as the general rule of thumb, whether they want a letter of recommendation from a physician, whether they're a DO school and require a letter of recommendation from a DO. Follow what the school requires. Now, above and beyond that, I think is really the core of the question. If I send the required letters and there's just this one other letter that I really know is going to show who I am and really be great for me, can't I send it as long as the school, it's still under the school's maximum letter count?
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
Like TMDSAS, we take in the letters, unlike, some of the other things. And so we would take in the letters but we're going to ultimately, TMDSAS is going to send to the schools whatever we receive.
Yep.
I mean, we're going to, and so the key is that the undergraduate institutions often will dictate if they're doing a committee packet, they may say you can only have up to 5 letters in your committee packet or whatever. And they may limit it at the undergraduate level as in terms of what they'll send. Yep. With the committee packet, and but ultimately, I think that the medical schools are going to look at whatever they get. They're going to look at it, and they're going to see what it's all about.
Awesome.
Is that your experience, Ryan?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yep. I think so.
Good.
Another Ask the Dean in the books. We're going to head off. It's right at time. I thought we were going to head off a little early, but we're right at time, which is great.
Yeah.
We have a fun follow-up.
Always great to spend Monday afternoons with you guys and get to chit-chat a little bit.
Chit-chat.
I mean, you guys, Ryan and Rachel, but also the broader you guys.
I thought you were talking about the students, and you.
No, I am talking about the students.
You put up with me.
I wish I could see their pictures. Well, you're calling me out on speaking the language. I mean, it's a whole nother thing.
That's a fun one. Awesome. All right, thank you everyone for coming. We'll see you next week.